last chapter. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. This is actually the last chapter of our book, chapter 20. Hope everybody's doing okay. It's getting cloudy out. I think it's going to rain soon. Probably going to be lousy weather from now until tomorrow afternoon, probably till Sunday. I think Sunday's supposed to be a little nicer, but still cold. Way too cold for May. Hope everybody's doing good on their lessons. It looks like 32 of you so far have done the quiz for the Emperor's Clothes, so I'm giving you feedback and sending it back to you on how you did. Most of you are doing pretty well in the multiple choice questions, and in the short answer, remember, don't want you to start your answers with because. I want you to start your answers with putting some of the question in your answer and then answering the question. That last question, number 10, is not a yes or no answer. It says why, and also it's a two-part question. And then at the end, it says, in the end, did pretending to see the clothes help him? And so I wanted you to answer that at least in 2 sentences. So if you didn't do that, I gave you feedback on what the answer should look like for those 2 questions. But most of you are doing pretty well on that. Everything else, I think, make sure you have your 60 minutes by ready for the week. Most of you are there. Take your spelling test on Spelling City, or your spelling assessment for your words for the week. You should have done word work every single day with those words, and then tested your spelling today. What else? Your Google slide for your story elements for your independent reading, and forgetting something. Ready? Spelling Emperor's Clothes. Oh, and your Mother's Day slide, that was optional. So some of you did do it and already gave them to your moms, and I got some messages saying that I already had some tears flowing, so that's awesome. So, try it. I know it's optional, but if you need something to do today and you want to do something for your mom, that's very original. It's something from you to your mom. That's, I didn't correct it. I didn't even look over the slides. That's for you to, answer those questions and then present them to your mom either on today or sometime this weekend or Sunday. But that is optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it's there for you to use if you need something to do for your mom. And then Mrs. Cologne's class, Social Studies, you had your oceans video. So you should know your 5 oceans: the Atlantic, the Pacific, Arctic, Southern, and Indian Oceans. And you should kind of know, where the boundaries are for those oceans. So your worksheet had to do with countries. If you need help with that, use Google Earth. You guys all know how to use Google Earth. I showed you how to use Google Earth in our classroom. I think it's a great resource for you to find some countries and see, find the oceans and then see what countries border those oceans. It's a great way to learn where certain countries are located. And then your quiz, it was 10 questions. I took it and got all 10 answers correct, but it was a difficult quiz. So if you listen to the video, you really had to watch the video and listen to it it was a short video. It was only 2.5 minutes long, but you might have had to go back into the video and watch it again to get those answers correct. So that's what I had for you today. Also, Ms. Glenn's class, you have that little game to play. Try and beat my time. 18 seconds was the quickest time. I only did it once, so it was kind of, my time it is what it was. I think in the classroom it was either 14 or 16 seconds, but it was easier to tap the locations on the Promethean board than it is to use my mouse on the computer. So 18 seconds is pretty quick, but as you get to know where the oceans and continents are, you should become better and better at it. So see if you can beat my score at 18 seconds. All right, Mr. Popper's Penguins. So at the end of chapter 19, we were posed with a big question to Mr. Popper. Was he going to have his penguins be in these movies and make millions of dollars? Or was he going to give the penguins to the admiral so they can go up to the North Pole and colonize penguins up in the North Pole? And that's kind of where we are. So the chapter 20 is called Farewell, Mr. Popper. I think I'm going to cry. So that tells me, as a foreshadowing, as I make a prediction, that maybe Mr. Popper says goodbye to his penguins. We'll see. I don't know if he's going to, he kind of has three options: to keep them and to keep them in his house. Probably has enough money now to take care of them, or have them be in these movies and make millions of dollars, or send them to the North Pole. And being that it says farewell, Mr. Popper, I think I know what the answer is, but I don't want to ruin it. It was a hard decision to make. Long after the visitors had gone, Mr. and Mrs. Popper sat and discussed what was best for everybody. Mrs. Popper could see the advantages of both offers, and she pointed these out without trying to influence him. I feel the penguins are really your responsibility, she said, and you must make up your mind. It was a pale and haggard Mr. Popper who was ready to announce his decision the next day. Mr. Klein, he said, I want you to know how much I appreciate your offer of putting my birds in the movies, but I'm afraid I have to refuse. I do not believe the life in Hollywood would be good for the penguins. Then he turned to Admiral Drake. Admiral Drake, I'm going to give you the birds. In doing this, I'm considering the birds first of all. I know they have been comfortable and happy with me. Lately, though, with the excitement and the warm weather, I've been worried about them. The birds have done so much for me that I have to do what's best for them. After all, they belong in a cold climate. And then I can't help being sorry for those men up at the North Pole without any penguins to help them pass the time. Your government will thank you, Mr. Popper, answered the Admiral. Congratulations, Admiral, said Mr. Klein. Maybe you're right at that, Popper. Hollywood might have been too much for the birds. I wish you'd let me make one short movie of them here in New York, though, before they go. Just some pictures of the sort of thing they do on the stage, We'd show the film everywhere with an announcement that these are the famous Mr. Popper penguins that are being taken to the North Pole by Admiral Drake of the United States Arctic Penguin Founding Expedition, or something like that. I'd like that very much, said Mr. Popper. We'd pay you, of course, continued Mr. Klein. Not a fortune, as we could have if you'd let us give them a contract, but say $25,000. We could use it, said Mrs. Popper. It'll be very quiet at 432 Proudfoot Avenue, said Mr. Popper, when everyone had left. Mrs. Popper did not answer. She knew that nothing she could say could really comfort him. However, said Mr. Popper, now that spring is here, a lot of people are wanting their houses painted, so we better be getting back. Anyway, said Bill, we've had 10 whole weeks of vacation right in the middle of the year, and not many children in Stillwater can say that. The next day, the cameramen arrived to make the picture of the penguins doing their tricks. It was arranged that the Poppers should stay in New York just long enough to see the expedition off. Meanwhile, in the harbor, the great sailing ship of Admiral Drake was being made ready for its long trip north. Every day, huge boxes of supplies of all sorts were hustled on board. The most comfortable quarters on the ship were turned over to the penguins, who were the cause of the voyage. Captain Cook was already quite familiar with the ship, since it was the same one the Admiral had sailed to the South Pole, where Captain Cook had often seen it. Greta, too, had seen vessels of its kind. The two of them were kept very busy showing and explaining everything to Nelson, Columbus, Louisa, Jenny, Scott, Magellan, Adelina, Isabella, Ferdinand, and Victoria. The sailors all took the greatest delight in watching the curious little birds at their explorations. It looks as if this will be a pretty lively trip, they would say. These Popper penguins certainly live up to their reputation. But at last everything was ready, and the day came when the Poppers were to go down and say goodbye. Bill and Janie ran all over the ship and did not want to leave when it was time to draw up the gangplank. The Admiral shook hands with them, and Mrs. Popper, and thanked them for having to train the extraordinary penguins that were to be a real contribution to science. I just want to show you a picture of Mr. Popper saying farewell to his penguins. Mr. Popper had gone down below to say a private farewell to his birds. All that kept him from breaking down completely was the knowledge that what he had was doing was what was best for them too. First he said goodbye to all the younger penguins, then to Greta, who had saved Captain Cook. Then last of all he leaned over and said a special goodbye to Captain Cook, who had come and made life so different for Mr. Popper. Then he wiped his eyes, straightened his back, and went up to the deck to say goodbye to Admiral Drake. Goodbye, Admiral Drake, he said. Goodbye, repeated the Admiral. Why, what do you mean? Aren't you coming with us? Me? Go with you to the North Pole? Why, of course, Mr. Popper. But how could I go with you? I'm not an explorer or scientist. I'm only a house painter. You're the keeper of the penguins, aren't you? Roared the Admiral. Man alive, aren't those penguins the reason for this whole expedition? And whose? I'll show you that picture before we leave. So what do you think? Is Mr. Popper going to go with them? And who's going to see that they're well and happy if you're not along? Go put on one of those fur suits like the rest of us. We're pulling anchor in a minute. Mama, shouted Mr. Popper to Mrs. Popper, who had already gone up the gangplank. I'm going too, I'm going too. Admiral Drake says he needs me. Mama, do you mind if I don't come home for a year or two? Oh, as to that, said Mrs. Popper, I'll miss you very much, my dear. But we have money to live on for a few years, and in the winter it will be much easier to keep the house tidy without a man sitting all around all day. I'll be getting back to Stillwater. Tomorrow is the day for the meeting of the Ladies' Aid and Missionary Society, and I'll be just in time. So goodbye, my love, good luck. Wow, she let him go. Goodbye and good luck, echoed the children, and the penguins, hearing the voices, scuttled up on deck and stood there beside the Admiral and Mr. Popper. Then they solemnly lifted their flippers and waved as the great ship moved down the river toward the sea. So he's leaving his family and his wife for a year, going to the North Pole with his penguins. And that is it. That's how the book ends. There's a little section here about the author. It says, Richard Atwater and his wife, Florence Atwater, never intended to collaborate on a book. Mr. Popper's Penguins was begun by Mr. Atwater, a newspaper columnist and a one-time classics instructor at the University of Chicago. But when a serious illness forced him to stop writing, Mrs. Atwater completed the story. Together, they created one of the most beloved children's books of all time. So I loved that book. That was a very good book. Awesome novel for, I think, closer probably to a fourth grade level, but I think it was a great book to read to the third grade class. So hopefully he makes it back to Stillwater and has a good time in North Pole, and his dreams are coming true. He's basically become an explorer, and he wanted to become an explorer, didn't want to stay in Stillwater all the time, but they made enough money so they can have a good, happy life, and his children should be okay. I'm sure they're going to miss him a little bit, but maybe he can visit from time to time, and then hopefully he'll come back once the penguins establish themselves in the North Pole. So that was a great story. I liked it. I was thinking about our next read aloud, which is going to start next week, and I'm going to do that on Google Classroom or Google Meet. So at 1 o'clock, I'm going to do a Google Meet, and you guys can join me for that and ask me questions, and I can ask you questions, and we can interact with the book. And I think we're going to read Winn-Dixie. Another one of my favorite books. It used to be summer reading requirement for third graders going into fourth grade. I don't even know how they're going to do that this year for your summer reading assignments. I don't even know if we're going to have one or not. It's probably something they're talking about right now. In past years, obviously, you guys have had choice, actually. You've had a choice. There's a list of novels according to your reading level, and you were able to choose what book you could take home for the summer and read. So this year, I don't know how that's going to work. We're still working, obviously, on how we can do that. So we'll see what answers they come up with. But I've thought if you don't get a chance to read Winn-Dixie, I think it's a good one for our read aloud for our next read aloud. It should probably take us to most of the year to get through that. So starting on Monday, we're going to do 1 o'clock Google Meets, and we're going to listen to Winn-Dixie. So I think I have, Izzy's reading it right now, actually. So we should be able to borrow the book from Izzy and use it. This was actually Mr. Popper's Penguins was Izzy's book too, which is great. It's a great thing about having a 3rd grade daughter right now. She's doing a lot of the same things that you guys are doing, which is kind of cool. All right. Hopefully everybody's good, and hopefully you have a great weekend. Hopefully you have a good Mother's Day. Treat your moms good. Do something nice for them on Sunday. Maybe make them breakfast or dinner or lunch or something. Maybe go out and get some flowers for her and make a card or do that Google Slides presentation. And hopefully you guys have a great weekend. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.